Good evening. This is Bill Samuels coming to you from my living room because of the coronavirus. I want to say a few things to you tonight about what we're going to do as a church and what you should be doing as a person until we get through this. I'm going to answer 7 questions that are asked of me. And this is why I have these notes here to make sure that I touch base with all of the 7 questions. First question, who am I? And second, what do I represent? And thirdly, what is the problem? And fourth, where do you live and where do I live? Number 5, are there other places to reside? Number 6, what is an anecdotal testimony? And number 7, I'm going to explore viral testing, ex nihilo, a phrase called ex nihilo, and finally, things which do appear, which is a philosophical understanding of reality. Now, let me start with who I am. I'm a former psychologist, former teacher of 8th grade. I studied at the University of Chicago for 11 years to receive some degrees in trying to understand psychology and theology and things like that. Who am I? I'm a person that loves the Lord. I'm a person who loves people, and I want to make sure that I continue to communicate with our parishioners during this period of quarantine. That's who I am, and I'm trying to address you because you may be full of anxiety, and I want to clear up some of that anxiety by who I am and basically what I know. Now, what do I represent? Well, I represent Genesis and Exodus. I represent Isaiah and Micah and Luke and Elisha and Elijah. I represent the idea of Isaiah when he said, "Who hath believed my report?" That's written in Isaiah 53. Now let's get down to what is the problem. What is the problem? There is an existential crisis which challenges what is truth and who has truth. The answer to that question comes out of anxiety and hope. If I answer that question adequately, the anxiety and hope dichotomy is something that we'll be able to get through. Anxiety comes from the fear of something that you can't put your finger on. I'm just afraid. Most of the time they're afraid because they have no hope. And when they have hope and they have organization, they can get through the existential crisis. Well, the second question is, since I represent Isaiah and them, and I know the problem, where do you live? Where do you live? Well, what does that mean? I have a favorite Psalm 91, that says quite strongly, he that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. That's where I live. I live in the shadow of the Almighty because I love the Lord. I study his word, and I like to bring his word to you. So that's why, where do you live? There are various places where people live. I live in Psalm 91. I live in Hebrews 10:25. I live in Hebrews 11:1 through 3, and I keep those scriptures in my heart, and every now and then when I get a chance to talk about them, I do. It looks like for the next 2 or 3 months or 2 or 3 weeks, whichever comes first, there's going to be a problem in communicating. And I'm going to take these Wednesday nights and these Sunday afternoons to explain to you where we are as a country and where we are as a church. Now, where do you live? And are there other places that you can reside? Yeah. You can reside in philosophy. You can reside in psychology. You can reside in politics. You can reside in economics. Those are places that people reside. What's coming up right now is a conversation between what is truth. What is truth and where you live have a direct correlation. What is truth? What is reality? Where do you live? Right now, science is coming right up against faith. People say, well, I don't believe in that. I believe in science. You know, science has the truth. Science works on things. And so therefore, if you want to give me a place of residence, I don't live in Psalm 91, I live in science. Well, how does science resolve the issues that we have going on right now? Well, one of the ways that science resolves is it says we're going to use the scientific method in order to get to the cure of this problem. Well, the scientific method says that in the next year and a half, 18 months, we should have a solution. Many people can't imagine waiting a year and a half or 18 months to get a solution to a problem. Therefore, they want to know, well, is there any hope? And if you live in the shadow of the Almighty, there's always hope. Now here comes a situation in which the president has said by Easter, he wants the churches full. Well, what happens is that one of the more positive things I've ever heard from the president is that he believes in something outside of science. Not so much that he rebukes science because he didn't know it, but he has a belief system outside of science. And that's where he agrees with me. That's what I have, a belief system outside of science, and I call it the Lord. I call it God. Now, in this belief system, they have something called anecdotal testimony. That is, you may hear a person say to you, I am sick and I can't get well. And I've been to the hospital, the doctor told me it's going to be fatal. It's a sickness unto death. And that's where religion and hope comes in. Oh, you're going to be sick unto death. You have this particular disease or that particular disease, but you still have hope. And the hope that we have is in the Lord, because the Lord is so strong, and the Lord has left us a message through his word that every goodbye ain't gone. Everybody that says you're sick don't know that God is able to heal you. And so what I want to do right now is to go over the way in which religion relates to illness, sickness, and the future. Well, the way that religious people do it is they do it through hope and the Word of God. I want to give you 3 areas of anecdotal testimony. There's a blind man in John 9. There's a blind man who was blind according to the scriptures from birth. He was blind from birth. And he met Jesus, and Jesus cured him of his blindness. When he walked around the town, it was clear to people that, hey, isn't that the same guy that used to be blind? How did he get well? And so the Pharisees and the other people who wanted to carry a sense of healing within them, they questioned this, and they asked his parents a question, how did he get healed? And the parents, knowing they would be in trouble if they gave the wrong answer, answered in this way: he is of age, he has a mouth, ask him. And so they went to him and asked him that, how did you get well? And he answered, I tell you what, I don't know who he is or what he represents, but this I can tell you, he says in testimony. I once was blind, but now I see. So his testimony was something to say to the world. I once was blind, and now I see. Well, did you have 3,000 tests? No, I didn't have any tests. Did you have a hospital beds, and did you have ventilators? And No, I didn't have any of that. A man came to me and told me how I could begin seeing. And so that's where I am now. I once was blind. I couldn't see a thing. I was blind from birth, but now I can see. His testimony is now called chapter 9 of John, and I believe it. Now here's another testimony which comes from 2 Kings chapter 7. 2 Kings chapter 7 has four lepers outside of a city, and an army surrounding the city ready to pounce on them. Well, the four lepers had no chance at all. They had no cure for the disease that they lived with. They were lepers. They had no hope. They were thrown out of the city because they had the disease. And they said, we only have three choices. One choice is to remain out here and die, or to go back in the city and be killed, or to go to the soldiers and find out that they're going to kill us. We have no solution at all, so we may as well go to the soldiers. At least they have food and victuals there. So they went to the Syrian army and found that there was nobody there. And they returned to the king, and they returned to the people who were looking for a way out. And they said, listen, we have a chance. The Syrian army has simply disappeared. The man of God in that case was Elisha, and he told them in a day's time, you will have enough flour, you will have enough barley, you will have enough things to clear up your hunger, to clear up your famine, and God will provide it. And sure enough, God provided. The third testimony is in Hebrews, and listen to this. The Hebrew testimony says basically, and everybody knows this, well, what is faith? Well, faith is substance and evidence. Substance of things and evidence of things. The faith is the substance itself. It has ways in itself of being. And so even more important than verse 11:1, chapter 11:1 is 11:3, because the things which are seen are not made of the things that appear. What? The things which are seen are not made out of the things which appear. That is, when we see things, we think that's what these things are. And what God tries to tell us continually is that the just shall live by faith and not by sight. Because what you think they appear in the microscope, in the machines that detect viruses, you think they're made out of those viruses. No, they're not made out of that. They're made out of something very different. They're made out of people who lie and cheat and steal. The things that we see is obedience. If you are not obedient, you don't do what the mayor says. You don't do what the governor says. You don't do. Here are things you need to be doing to stop the virus. But if you're a disobedient person, you delay the idea of getting cured. So when somebody tells you, well, when are we going to be through this? Well, when you stop being obedient. When you start being obedient and stop being disobedient, when it's clear to you that God is in control of the world, and the things that you see are not made of the things which do appear. Wow, that's heavy. And I want to make sure that we understand that in the next few weeks, these kind of words, this kind of understanding of the Bible has to be explored. We can't lose contact because the Hebrews remind us, Hebrew 10:25, that do not stop having your assemblies. We're going to have our assemblies now because we're going to be obedient to the government. The government says, don't go out, don't do anything like this. Okay, so then we will have to communicate like this. Well, how are we going to do it? Every Wednesday and every Sunday, we'll be on the air. I'll be a little better the next 2 or 3 times we we have this little chat that I have today. But the point is, let's get it started today. Work with me a little bit, and we might find a way to even communicate by phone. I'll ask my son how we can do this, and also have the phone have an audio where you can ask questions and all that kind of stuff. But here we are, we're doing this. It's an attempt to spread God's word. Whatever we didn't get right, God will get it right, because we're trying to do God's will. And we believe and trust in God. And even though they asked us to shut down the church for a minute, we will still communicate with God's church, which is the human beings who believe and trust in him.